We are now in the final panel for today. We had 3 excellent panels, and they all touched upon very interesting, for under kind of overlooked sometimes aspects, and they really helped us shed light and understand themes that go on more that we haven't seen before. So thank you all to the previous presenters. Now, our last but not least panel, panel 4, Discoursing Sectarian Rhetoric, Symbolism, and Power. Very excited to have these panelists here with us. So let me introduce them very quickly. So firstly, we have Balsam Mustafa from the University of Birmingham. She'll be presenting titled Iraq's Tishreen October, Protests, Slogans and Chants, Reframing Narratives, Reclaiming Identity. The second presenter will be Batul Dugan Akas from Qatar University and Durham University, Maintenance of Sedimented Hegemony, Articulation of Sectarianism Discourse. Third one will be Omar Karim from the University of Birmingham, Desectarianization within the Saudi religious fold, Evolving Institutional Discourses and the New. And last but not least, Legacy and Securitization, a content analysis of Hassan Nasrallah's speech in YouTube about Syria's crisis. And that will be done by Rashid Al-Rashid from Lancaster University. So, Balsam, are you ready?
Yes. Hi, everyone. Thank you very much, Aziz. It's great to be here today. So I'm going to first share my screen.
There you go. Let me know whenever you're ready. Start.
Yes, thank you.
You're welcome.
So today I'm gonna talk about my recent paper on the slogans and chants raised by Iraqi demonstrators in the context of Iraq's protest movement of 2019. And it is known in Iraq as the Tishreen or October Revolution, because although protest movements are not something that is unprecedented in the recent history of Iraq, they have been recurrent since 2011, but this protest movement was the largest in its scope, demands, and also it was very unique in the slogans and chants that were raised. And the idea behind writing this paper started as I was translating those chants and other content shared by Iraqi activists and their supporters on social media back in October 2019. And I thought that these slogans and chants was so powerful. And I started asking myself about their origin, who wrote them, whether they drew from different sources. And when I did my research, I found that, interestingly, they drew from a variety of sources and they were remodified by protesters in order to create new narratives. So just to give you a bit of background to the Iraq's protest movement. So as you see here, this picture is from Tahrir Square in Baghdad, which witnessed the protest, which was the center of the protests. And this Nurid Watan, which translates into "we want a homeland," was the key slogan of the Iraq's protest, which it tells you a lot about these protests were not just about unemployment, poor basic services, corruption, etc., but it was about reclaiming a sense of belonging and a shared collective identity. So I'm looking at desectarianization that takes place from bottom to top, because I'm looking at individual activists and how they constructed a collective identity. And I want to say something about the literature. So although there is like an interesting emergent scholarship Arabic language scholarship by Iraqi scholars on this topic. It's still largely understudied by English language scholarships. There's so much yet to investigate and to explore. So these were my research questions. Basically, as I said, I wanted to know more about what narratives were constituted by the newly remodified slogans and chant, and to what extent have they challenged post-2003 ethno-sectarian system and its sectarian narratives. So my argument is that these slogans and chants were able to circulate a new narrative that not only defied the post-2003 ethno-sectarian muhassasa system, but also established a collective identity centered this time around nationalism in the first place. And I'm here using nationalism in a positive sense. So the new narratives, these new narratives circulated by mainly because the protests were mainly led by Shia Muslims, and that's why this was really interesting and powerful. But they highlighted this Iraqi identity, and this doesn't suggest that their Shia identity became invisible. Rather, it suggests that it was more integrated into an Iraqi collective identity. So obviously the new narratives anger dominant parties, particularly Iranian-backed parties and their militias, because they challenge their sectarian discourse and their identity. So as a result, they have resorted to the use of force. So hundreds of Iraqi demonstrators were killed, thousands were injured, dozens were arrested, kidnapped, assassinated, or forcibly disappeared. And along the use of force, there has been a counter narrative, so antagonistic narrative, aimed at destabilizing and undermining the protest narrative through a deliberate disinformation campaign that sought to demonize the demonstrators and discredit their protest movement through the use of terminology, pejorative terminology such as Ba'athist, Joka gangs in reference to the 2019's movie Joka, and or Western embassies, spies, or agents. So I use the concept of securitization, arguing that the counter narrative of militias and political parties securitize the protest as a threat to in order to other. So there's another ring that took place, but this time it was against the Shia population, whom those parties claimed to represent. I want first to say something about slogans and chants, but very quickly, really, because in the literature they are used interchangeably. But I think it's very useful to differentiate between them, between the two, whilst acknowledging the overlap that can take place. Slogans are shorter, so the origin of a slogan, if we trace its etymology, it means to cry. A war cry or army cry, and they are shorter sentences or phrases. However, they can be communicated through different mediums and through different genres. And so, for example, as you see in the picture, this was another key slogan raised during the protest, Nazil akhud haqqi, which translates into I am taking into the street to claim my right. And this was turned into a famous song associated with the protest movement. Chants, on the other hand, if we trace its etymology, it means to sing. So unlike songs, they are longer and they always involve sound, rhythm, and singing. So there is always melody. And in the context, in the Iraqi context, there are different chants. So there are hosat, what we call in Iraqi hosat or araba, which is a type of a poetic chant that has emerged in the south of Iraq and was used during times of tribal conflict and wars. And there is also a hizuja or inshuda, and sometimes these are used interchangeably. They are very similar to songs. They can be used to refer to enthusiastic war songs in particular. Both slogans and chants share similar characteristics, so they need to be familiar, not very original really, repeated, memorizable, performed in order to be easily communicated to audiences. I will quickly mention the theoretical framework that I have used in my paper. So I use different concepts. I combine different concepts from two approaches. One, a social semiotic multimodal approach to communication study, and the other one is a social approach to narrative, which can be seen as an extension to discourse approaches, treating the slogans and chants as genres that keep, evolve, and change, so they are not static. And as they do so, they always establish new narratives, and those narratives in turn construct new realities. So narratives cannot be dissociated from identities. They are always linked to identities. So as I mentioned, Iraqi slogans and chants interestingly drew from different sources. So they either drew from religious hosat, particularly those recited during Shia religious marches commemorating the death of Imam Hussein, Prophet Muhammad's grandson, or from slogans or ahazij by Shia armed groups, their leaders or supporters, or from tribal hosat, or also from war anashid sung during the Iraq-Iran war. And this was really interesting, but at the same time controversial, because it gave ruling parties an excuse to further demonize the protesters, describing them as Ba'athists. However, it's important to mention that they used them in a way that recontextualize them, and again, to reinforce the sense of belonging to their country, to articulate their outrage against the growing influence and interference by the Iranian regime in Iraq. So, but for today's presentation, I have chosen to talk about the three narratives shaped by three chants. The first one is Haya Shababak Ya Watan Haya. So these are your youth, O my homeland, and this is my translation. They have sacrificed their blood and raised your flag. This chant was specifically raised by Iraqi students each Sunday, because Sundays saw the participation of Iraqi students, whether in Tahrir Square, as you see here in the picture, or in other squares in other provinces in the south. Originally, this slogan, or this chant, sorry, started as, or emerged as a religious inshuda. I think that came out in 2014, and then it was reused by members of a Peace Brigade militia formed by the controversial cleric Muqtada al-Sadr to praise their leader, and to again to reinforce their identity and their belonging to this armed group and to Muqtada al-Sadr. So it used to say, these are your men, al-Sadr, something like that. So as you see, by changing these words, now we have a totally different narrative about belonging to the country. And that's why it could resonate among the majority of Iraqis, whether inside the country or beyond. The second chant is from Nasiriyah, and it's one of my favorite. Nasiriyah is a province in the south, which played a vital role in the protest movement. And Al-Haboubi Square, again, witnessed a very violent security crackdown. So this is my translation of this chant. I'm not sure if I clicked the sound. Unfortunately, when I shared the screen, because I wanted to show you just 1 second or 2 seconds from the video. So I'm not sure if you will be able to hear it, but let's give it a try.
Why don't you have a go, and then we'll see.
Yeah, thank you.
No problem.
Can you hear it at all?
No.
Oh yeah, because I think I needed to share sound. So as you see, there is a clapping, so there is sound, and there is rhythm, there is performance. And so I will go back to my screen just to talk about the translation. Yeah, so sorry. So the translation says, we don't want a tale of any embassy. And that was a metaphor used by Iraqis to describe, again, supporters of the Iranian regime. And they also said, we don't want a leader who is Ja'fari meaning Shia. And this was to defy older slogans by the post-2003 parties when they used to say, or to convince the population, the Shia population, that it's time that the Shia would rule. So this was within the victimhood narrative, but they no longer care about it. So, and they said, we don't want someone who is Ja'fari yet turn to be Sarsari, and I kept this word. This is Iraqi slang, which can be translated into a corrupt person or immoral. We want a noble politician. We no longer care about any religion. So as you see, this could be described as a narrative of a secular rule or non-Islamist rule, but it was contested also. It's important to mention this by other protesters. However, it really resonated among Iraqis, and the last slogan, which was chanted by protesters from Tikrit. Tikrit is in the west of Iraq, and it is a largely Sunni area, and that was really interesting. So by early December, protesters from the north and west of Iraq took into the streets to show solidarity with Nasiriyah, with the protest movement in general, and with Nasiriyah demonstrators in particular, following a massacre that took place at Al-Haboubi Square. And this is really telling, and this sort of disapproves the argument that Sunni did not participate in the protest for a variety of valid reasons. But they indeed tried to participate. However, the marches and protests were immediately repressed, and prominent activists were silenced. So the chant says, 10 die, 100 die, I won't give up the cause. This chant became very famous during the context of the 2018 protest movement in the oil-rich province of Basra. The cause, again, in reference to the cause of Iraqi rights. So again, this is the collective narratives about Iraqis' grievances. And but now it has turned into 100 die, 100 dies. Nasiriyah's voice shall remain. So Tikrit's protesters were performing, so not just chanting, but performing this chant to show solidarity. And if you can see here in the picture, they were beating on their chest. And this body language, this is really important because they are doing movements performed by Shia Muslims during religious occasions. So this is the narrative of solidarities that transcended the southern provinces into the north and west of Iraq. So to conclude, I think that the remodification of the slogans of religious nature was a powerful tool employed by Shia demonstrators and activists to re-emphasize an Iraqi Shia identity, or to reclaim that identity and disconnecting it from the identity of the ruling parties or Iran. However, these narratives continued and remain to be contested in the media apparatus of the ruling parties and their militias. We can't say that there is a clear binary between narratives and counter narratives. They always keep contesting each other. And to give an example, the first chant that I talk about we are our youth, our homeland, has been recently re-adopted in a different context by members of the Popular Mobilization Forces, or the Hashd al-Sha'bi, which is mainly formed of Shia armed groups that participated in the fight against the terrorist group Islamic State. So again, this was a new narrative in a completely different context. I really wanted to share with you some of the videos, but unfortunately wouldn't be able to hear the sound. So do I have a few seconds, Aziz?
Yes, yes, you do.
Oh, okay. Sorry. So I will try just to show you the... You can at least see the body language and the performance of the Tikrit protesters. Yeah. So yeah, I think that's all, and I will be happy to answer any question during the Q&A. Thank you very much.
Fantastic. Fantastic, Batul. I'm sorry, Balsam. Thank you very much.
Balsam, thank you.
I'm sorry. Thank you very much, Balsam, for that wonderful discussion regarding slogans. I think it was a lot of recycling of slogans and the poetry. I think it seems like there's a lot of poetry there it is very, very fascinating to see more insight into that, and Arabic sources that you looked at too. So thank you very much for sharing that with us. So before I go to the next speaker, I just forgot to say to everyone, to the attendees and listeners, you're more than welcome to put questions in the Q&A box, in the Q&A function. Just I'm sure people are using it, just so I just wanted to remind people of that. Okay, so second on our panel, excellent discussion that will take place by Betul Dongan Akas from Qatar and Durham University. Her paper is titled Maintenance of Sedimented Hegemony, Articulation of Sectarianism Discourse. So Betul, whenever you are ready, take it away.
Thank you, Aziz, and I would like to say hi to all my colleagues and all the people who are listening us since the morning. And I know it's kind of end of day, but hopefully I will get your attention. I will share my screen to present my presentation. Okay, let me start here. Okay, so as it is mentioned by Aziz, my presentation will be about maintenance of sedimented hegemony, which means articulation of sectarianism discourse. So the paper is focused on the GCC and 6 oil monarchies. And as opposed to many other papers presented so far, the focus is the power or the intensified power by the hegemonic power rather than the protesters itself or the opposition points, I mean, in the conflict itself. Okay, so in the outline, I would like to share with you the discourse theory that initially I will just give a summary about it. Then we will discuss Saudi Arabia's hegemony before the Arab Spring, which is the sedimented discourse in the GCC political complex. Then we will move through the moments after the Arab Spring to discuss articulation of sectarianism to discourse. Okay, so to start with, the paper itself is designed from a post-structuralist perspective, mainly the use of discourse theory. So in the discourse theory, it comes with a whole dictionary and terminology. So it is not in the way it defines discourse is not the same with critical discourse analysis or other types of discourse analysis. Discourse theory is not only about discourse analysis, rather it is actually about defining, depicturing, and deconstructing the power and hegemony in a given society or in a political complexity. So it's not only about the discourse or speech by the political elite or the leader. It's not about only the visual materials. It's everything in the society in a political complex part of discourse theory. That's why the methodology and the data collection of the paper is not only about the written discourse. It is it's actually comprehensive for linguistic and non-linguistic materials, including the political maneuvers or decisions. So that's why post-structuralist discourse theory is actually needs a little bit explanation before going into detail with the case studies. So to start with, articulation is the first concept. Laclau and Moffat is describing it as a reaction of sedimented political hegemony in a region or in a political situation, whether is it domestic or regional or global. When we have an organic crisis in a political complexity, which means there will be a structural change, a dislocation of sedimented discourse starting. So with an organic crisis, in my case study, this is the Arab Spring, the hegemonic power of the region started articulation and re-articulation of its signifiers and elements to the political discourse to keep its power maintained. So that's why articulation here means additional linguistic and non-linguistic elements to the political discourse to stay as the hegemonic power. So this is defined as articulation, but articulation is also doesn't mean that the antagonism between social forces in the political complexity or the trench war between them will be ended. It will continue as much as an emerging or an alternative political discourse will be able to institutionalize itself. So in this case, in the GCC, we don't have an institutionalization and alternative discourse yet, but we have alternative discourses by UAE and Qatar, which are not institutionalized, but they are emerging as an alternative to Saudi narrative in the region from different angles. So that's why for post-structural discourse theory, hegemonization and power, they are overlapping and really critical concepts to understand hegemonic process of a given political complexity. For discourse theory, there are 4 stages of hegemonization, but they are not like one follow each the after. It's actually happening all the same time, but because it's easy to define them when they are step by step, I have this visual design to like give you a clear picture of it. So in the first stage, we have a dislocation of sedimented discourse. As I said just before, the Arab Spring is the organic crisis given a structural change to the region. Then we have the competition, which means the political struggle between the forces in the political complexity. Here we have diplomatic rift between Qatar and the other GCC countries in 2014. We have Riyadh Agreement in 2014, which means there was a trench war between alternative discourses, and Emirati or UAE's narrative also start emerging from there in Yemen as an alternative to Saudi Arabian discourse. So antagonism is not only about between Qatar and anti-Qatar bloc, quartet, but it's also about all other states which have an alternative discourse to Saudi Arabian narrative in the region. So that's why a historic bloc was structured, or there was an aim to structure an historic bloc with an alignment over being an alternative or being different, being as they wish in the region. So although we know that Qatar and UAE are not the best allies now in the region, the way they actually kind of formulating their national interest as an alternative to dominated discourse led them having diverse historic blocs in the region. In this case, we can bring Turkey as a partner to Qatar and Iran as a partner to Qatar, and UAE can go with extra regional actors, and of course later by Saudi Arabia. Then we have the imaginary, which means after all this hegemonization struggles, an alternative discourse emerged from being a myth to being an imaginary in the regional complexity. So now there will be new different political actions to formulate dominating discourse in the society. So that's why when it comes to articulation of sectarianism in the GCC, it's not only about the way leaders speak or the way the leader interpret the discourse or the political protests. It's actually about the way they perceive or approach the idea of hegemony and power. Because for the post-structural discourse theory, hegemony is about material and non-material leadership over a society, which means in this leadership, articulation of elements is a continuous process. So we have articulation of sectarianism in the initial stage of Arab Spring, but it didn't stay there. As soon as Saudi Arabia needs more articulations to keep its power maintained, it has re-articulations of sectarianism in different contexts and in different shapes. So that's why hegemony and power in the discourse theory are continuously constructed elements. And we have all these material and non-material power capabilities constructed for the sake of a leadership. So leadership here really critical to understand the idea of being dominated discourse or sedimented discourse in a given political complexity. And as the last section, sorry, here, as the 4th element, the hegemony and power are actually an interplay between particularism and universalism. These are the concepts by discourse theory, but I will shortly define them. So particularism means in a given political complex, there is a way of defining a situation. And if your definition, your depiction of it, the way you frame the atmosphere of an era after an organic crisis, is if it gains a universal approach or universal acceptance, then you will be dominating the discourse of the region or of the political complexity. So being universal and being particular in a given political complexity is defining your role as an hegemonic discourse or as an alternative discourse. So that's why hegemony and power actually also a lot about being recognized by others as a legitimate representative of given political situation. So the last one, in this exercise of leadership, a particular discourse is maintaining its hegemony, but it's not only about maintaining hegemony, it's only about dominating the change in the society. So that's why while discussing, So while discussing sedimented discourse in the GCC, the first argument of the paper is accepting Saudi Arabian role in the GCC as a hegemonic power since the establishment of nation states in the GCC. So that's why Saudi Arabia's hegemonic power was also valid before the Arab Spring. So that's why Arab Spring was dislocating its power. And we need to ask the question, what makes Saudi Arabia and the GCC a hegemonic power? So that's why I have done an historical contextualization of Saudi authority over the rest of GCC countries. And when I done it, there are two main time periods. First one, the formation of nation states, and until the Iraq War. Because until the Iraq War, there were a triplet hegemonic struggle between the regional countries like Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq. But after the Iraq War, we unfortunately lost the power balance between Iraq and other countries. And the second era has only Saudi Arabia and Iran, which we all talk about since the morning, as rivalry powers in the region. So in the first era, Iranian revolution was the first stage Saudi Arabia actually articulated a sectarian discourse to its narrative. So not only to discourse, but also in political, societal, economical approach to the ruling regional affairs. And in terms of the small states' role in the regional complexity, the Iranian threat was an articulated signifier to the hegemonic discourse, because this is also why we had GCC establishment to protect small states against this regional rivalry, which is defined as a sectarian threat. So in the second era, which is defined the new Cold War in the literature, Gulf Studies literature, 9/11 and the rise of small states are two determinant elements defining the Saudi Arabian hegemony. For the small states of GCC, because they have limited security and limited political power in the world politics, although they have economic power, the way they define themselves in the region and in abroad, it's all about the way Saudi Arabia formulate their roles. It was like that before the Arab Spring. But because they have leaderships constituting their multidimensional security frameworks like in UAE and Qatar in terms of economic, social, political, and military understanding of power, now their role as a small state is defined in a different perspective, carrying a niche policy making in soft power or in hard power, as we see in the UAE's case in Yemen. So that's why in the second era, which is the new Cold War in the region, there was this establishment of a rise of small states. And with the 9/11, Saudi Arabia is actually, although it had also problems with the US, the tripolarity transformed into unipolar discourse because we didn't have any more an Iraqi power included. So Saudi Arabian leadership was a valuable tool for small states to secure them against Iranian threat. So in this now we had an organic crisis with 2011 Arab uprisings, or Arab Spring, as you wish to define it. Then here I have four main assumptions. After the organic crisis, Saudi Arabia start being in a defensive position, because now the leadership has been able to understand the society is not the same with the ruling of pre-Arab Spring Iran. So they need to defend their political interest in the regional context as well against the small states, because the legitimacy of authoritarian regimes in the region damaged by the uprisings and the civil wars and the political conflicts in Egypt. Then we have monopolization of power under Saudi Arabia's support to status quo damaged, because these other states like Qatar and UAE, the way they react to the Arab Spring or the era after the Arab Spring was quite different than Saudi Arabian response in different manners. So the monopolization of power damaged with other countries' response to the crisis. Then we have re-articulation of elements like reform and Iranian threat from a sectarian perspective to consolidate the sectarian discourse as a kind of security umbrella for small states. Then there are many case studies, if you like to go through the articulation of sectarianism discourse in the GCC, like Bahrain and preemptive domestic measures in Saudi Arabia after the Arab Spring, and Iranian threat in general. Because when it comes to GCC policymakers, in every occasion, they would like to define an Iranian threat, whether is it cultural, is it soft power, economic, nuclear weapons, in everything there's an Iranian threat. So there is this understanding of Iranian threat in general. And Qatar-Iran relations was also another case study and was part of the GCC crisis because Qatar was accused of being a good ally of Iran. Then we have Iranian involvement to Yemen and Iraq and Syria. So in my paper, my focus are, because I am focusing on GCC context, I am looking at Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, Qatar-Iran relations, and Iranian involvement to Yemen to see to what extent the articulation of sectarianism was valid for the Saudi Arabian discourse. So here, because we have re-articulation in all these case studies. Actually, before going into conceptualizing them, I can go through define their role in the discourse theory. So re-articulation of sectarianism in the GCC by Saudi Arabian power or hegemonic power is an ongoing process. So although in the Bahraini protest, which started as the first protest in the region, along with the Saudi Arabian protest, defined as a sectarian protest, but it was actually a cross-sectarian movement. And the GCC political response supported later by a military response. I think we all know these details, so I'm not going to go through them. But I would like to say that Bahrain was the initial point, and a military intervention actually supported the power of status quo and maintenance of hegemony. Then it didn't stop there. We have other occasions, as I said in the previous presentation, with the domestic measures in Saudi Arabia and Qatar-Iran relations, and in Yemen war, everything was again defined from a sectarian perspective. So as soon as there is a challenge to hegemonic discourse, sectarianism re-articulated from different angles. So it's an ongoing process. Secondly, articulation and re-articulation overlaps. For instance, Saudi Arabia can re-articulate Iranian threat discourse in terms of Qatar's foreign policy making, but in terms of its involvement to Yemen, Iran's involvement to Yemen, it can re-articulate another type of sectarian discourse. So there is more than one type of sectarian discourse when it comes to keeping hegemony dominated in different regional fractions. So it's actually quite complex because maintenance of hegemony requires more than one way of political fight or struggle. So this is the articulation of sectarianism in terms of Saudi Arabian hegemony and keeping it dominated, hegemonic power in the region. It is discursive. So we didn't see any we didn't see any direct war between Iran and Saudi Arabia, although we have proxies. It is oppressive, as we see in Bahrain and in Saudi Arabia. The minorities in Saudi Arabia, the 2 million Shia minority, and in Bahrain, the majority of population are Shia. They are oppressed by the rulers in a really, in really terrible ways. So it is definitely oppressive. Then we have interventionist approach, as we see in Qatar-Iran relations, which were quite mild in terms of diplomatic level. And we have Yemeni conflict, turned out a sectarian conflict, although it has actually deep reasons in structure and society of Yemen, rather than only being a sectarian conflict. So it is interventionist, discursive, and oppressive. And it has a domino effect. So when you blame Iran in any problem in the region and re-articulate sectarianism, also because you made society already familiar with all these sectarian narrative, it is kind of domino effect between the political situations, and it is transborder, because the forces in GCC, social forces like the tribes and families, they are transnational. So when you had a problem with a family in Saudi Arabia, the same family has a connection in Bahrain, because tribes are transnational. So that's why re-articulation of sectarianism is actually not stayed in a specific situation. It went beyond borders. And then we have also, because of re-articulation of sectarianism, the conjunctural crisis also coming, like the GCC crisis. They are different than organic crisis. They are not structural, but rather for short-term political interest. And as we see in GCC crisis, or maybe in Yemen, you can define as a conjunctural crisis, articulation and re-articulation opens new maneuver space for the alternative narratives. And as we see in Syria, Yemen, and in domestic politics of GCC states, articulation of sectarianism is contradicting sometimes with the state narrative and societal response. We can't say in the GCC there's a societal reaction to Shia for it's the same way the political elite is reacting. Of course, we can't count everybody's ideas in the political narrative, but in terms of a general response, it is contradicting also. Let's say we have an approachment of Iran and Saudi Arabia in terms of nuclear deal, or in Yemen, but we don't see it in another era. So that's why my paper is concluding the idea of articulation and re-articulation of sectarianism in the region, asking, is there an imaginary of a sectarian conflict? Because we have a competition, antagonism, and trench war going all together, starting from an organic crisis and emerging an hegemonic discourse, myth, and imaginary. In all these processes, is there a real imaginary of sectarian conflict, or is it only about the way political narrative is constructed or deconstructed from a different angle? I hope I didn't go beyond the time limit, and this is all I would like to say. Thank you.
Oh, fantastic. Thank you. Thank you very much, Batul. That was a very fascinating insight and a very well articulated explanation on the Saudi kind of GCC hegemonic bloc. Well, what I think found really interesting about this was that how you eloquently articulated or incorporated the Essex School of Discourse Analysis into this. So as someone who's graduated from Essex University, I really, it's really good to see the Essex School of Discourse Analysis play a role in the international relations of the Middle East. So very, very interesting. Thank you very much for articulating that. So next, we have our friend Omar Karim from the University of Birmingham, and his paper titled Desectarianization with the Saudi Religious Fold, Evolving Institutional Discourses and New Leaderships. I made a mistake, everybody. I made the mistake in the typo. Please forgive me. Please forgive me. Please forgive me, Omar. And Omar, the presentation is yours. Off you go, my friend. Let me know when you're ready.
All right. Thank you. Can you all hear me?
Yes, we could hear you fine.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for giving me this prestigious CPAD platform. And my apologies that we have a major power failure. So I am actually holding my mobile and giving this presentation because my laptop has its battery has gone. Fortunately, my mobile is on. So I will just I have just made some notes because the original notes, they were again in the laptop, but I will try to you can say academically entertain the audience as much as I can. So in order to start, I would say that this desectarianization research, it's actually a follow-up of another paper which I did, which actually focus more on the political discourse and the discourse and the changing discourses of sectarianism within Saudi Arabia on the leadership level. So now this time in this paper, I am trying to focus on the apparent desectarianization, which I call basically discursive desectarianization, because one of the points I try to project in both of these papers is that this is not a bottom to top desectarianization. It is a desectarianization trend which is at least in the institutional sense, it is coming from top to bottom. So we need to give some time to make predictions if this is a more organic trend or a rather top to bottom influence. So my research basically focuses on the desectarianization within the Saudi religious fold this time, and the evolving institutional discourses related to sectarianism and their evolution alongside the emergence of new religious leaderships within the Saudi religious fold that in a way support and cement these new discourses within the religious fraternity. So we can start by giving a backgrounder that Saudi religious fold, as we know, has been quite unilateral in its sectarian outlook, because Saudi Arabia has been the state has been the home to the Ahl Hadith school, or some people call it the Wahhabism in relation to Sheikh Abdul Wahhab. So this has been the background of the Saudi religious fold, and because of the unique relationship of the Saudi religious establishment or religious cadres with the Saudi political leadership, it became even further significant and important. There have been different studies conducted on the nature of sectarianization within the Saudi society, particularly the Saudi society that came into being after the formation of the third Saudi state by King Abdulaziz Saud. And it has been argued that because we know that the Saudi Shias, towards which this sectarianism or sectarianization has been a relevant debate, they are mainly in three regions. One group resides, or the largest community remains within the Saudi Eastern province, and there is a smaller community in Najran. They are Ismailis, they are not 12 Shias, and then there is another little community in Medina. So the Saudi political leadership, they have treated treated the Shia citizens in a very interesting manner, where initially, of course, they were not given complete freedom of, say, freedoms at the level of the other Saudi citizens, but they were also not under some sort of state backed repression, as some sources do claim. We must understand that the politicization of religious identity, and particularly the politicization of Saudi Shia identity after the revolution in Iran, basically created this new trend, which can then be codified as sectarianism within the Saudi political fold. And then we know that there have been different incidents, specifically during the Hajj, where there was a clash and between pilgrims. And after the Islamic Revolution, there were clashes in the eastern province, and then as there were clashes in 1987 during the Hajj between Saudi security officials and Iranian pilgrims. So there was naturally a state of heightened tension between the Saudi state and its Shia citizens, mainly residing in the Saudi eastern province. Sorry if I miss out some things, because these are just my notes, so the detailed presentation, I don't have it. But we know that this has been one of the political issues, and the Saudi state has been, you can say that it is not inherently sectarian in its outlook toward the Saudi Shia citizens, but it has also instrumentalized this sectarianism as a political leverage or variable against its Shia citizens, but it has also tried to protect the Shia citizens against more extreme elements within the Saudi religious fold. And we have seen that some scholars have called it a divide and rule approach, and we have also seen that in the 1990s, Saudi leadership was actively engaging with the Saudi Shia political fraternity and the religious fraternity who have left out, who have gone out of the country, and a lot of them returned. And it is very interesting that this was the same period when the Saudi state and Saudi political leadership was having problems with Sahwa movement within Saudi Arabia, or we can say the form of political Islamists within Saudi Arabia. So the state necessarily doesn't have a sectarian outlook, as I have argued in my previous paper, but owing to the politicization of Shia identity, or the influence of Iranian political messaging, there has been definitely a sort of distrust within the political fold and the Shia citizen. So let us see what has been the situation within the religious fold. We know that the Saudi religious leadership, or we can divide it into different segments actually. One is the official religious establishment that falls under the Senior Council of Ulama, and then we have of course popular clerics who are associated with the Sahwa movement, and then we have independent clerics. There are other clerics who are also affiliated with the Madakhali school of thought. So at one end we have this plethora of different religious cadres within the Saudi religious fold, and most of them, they harbored very extreme views towards the Saudi Shia population. I have a few of like I managed to draw a few key figures that have attacked Saudi Shias in their fatwa or in their statements. They include people like Sheikh Nasser al-Umar, who is a very famous cleric, and Sheikh Ibrahim al-Faris. And there are also these projections of, you can say, criticisms or condemnations of the Shia citizenry of Saudi Arabia. We have seen a spike in them after every incident which involved a clash between Saudi security forces and Saudi Shias. In particular, the incident that happened in the Jannat al-Baqi cemetery in Medina in 2009, it led to some sharp reactions from the Saudi government, particularly by, at that time, the interior minister, or I think at that time he was, yeah, interior minister, as probably the crown prince. No, I'm not sure. Prince Naif. So Prince Naif reacted very strongly, and he was of the view that the Saudi Shias need to be respectful of the laws of the state. And when after his reaction came the reaction of at that time one of the most firebrand and not very important, but more you can say more uh, more firebrand sort of clerics, which was Sheikh Nimr al-Nimr, and he reacted very strongly. And Sheikh Nimr's reaction then enraged the Saudi clergy at all, and and he was then attacked by Sheikh Safar al-Hawali, who considered Sheikh Nimr as an outsider, as an agent of the Iranians. So this was the sort of discourse that emanated out of one particular incident. So we have a pattern in which uh, an incident happens where the Saudi state engages with the Saudi Shia citizens in a conflictual manner, and then the Saudi religious fold, whether it is the official religious fold or it is the Sahwa or other clerics who are not formally under the Saudi official ulama council, they don't fall under it. They all jump out in their condemnations and in their I would say, I will go beyond, in their own unique definitions of the Saudi Shia clergy and citizens at large. And it is very interesting that when Sheikh Safar al-Hawali attacked Sheikh Nimr, he actually used the analogy of, he actually compared the Saudi Shias with the Mormons in United States, and he said that the Mormons have constantly fought and constantly argued for an exceptional status within the U.S. Because they practice polygamy and they have some certain other specific rituals. So he was of the view that Saudi Shias are actually they also want a special status within Saudi Arabia, and they are not happy with being just normal citizens as much as other Saudi citizens are. So this actually showed that even very senior figures like uh, within the Saudi, within the typical and the Sunni or Wahhabi clergy within Saudi Arabia, for them the ultimate other within the religious fold was the Saudi Shia. So this othering was very much within the religious discourse that was coming out, and it superimposed itself with the political discourse that came out after each such incidents. And then we have clerics like Sheikh Arifi, who accused the Shias of raising banners and pictures of Ayatollah Khamenei, and in a way, again, a charge of being a fifth columnist against the Saudi state, and not loyal and not faithful towards the Saudi state. And he questioned that why I don't see pictures of King Abdullah in the Shia commemorations and in Shia processions. So this was the sort of, you can say, broad mindset and discursive constructions projected out of the Saudi religious fold, or you can say the Wahhabi religious fold. Of course, I have some other fatwa from the Saudi senior ulama and different Saudi clerics as well, which are derogatory or which mention the Shias as you can say puppets of Iran, or as an essentially fifth column. But we see that with the change of although there were changes happening during the lifetime of King Abdullah, especially that tried to restrain or constrain the powers and you can say the limits of Saudi clergy or clerics. One famous incident was when the King Abdullah University of Management and Technology was launched and co-education was inaugurated there. There was some serious reaction from Sheikh Nasser al-Shatri, and then there were tensions between the Saudi state and the cleric, but then gradually those tensions eased out. So we see that there were tendencies and trends that were apparent during the lifetime of King Abdullah, and King Abdullah also initiated, we know, the Saudi National Dialogue, in which there was an attempt to make the Saudi Shia clergy and the Shia notables sit together with the Sunni notables and clerics within the Sunni fold. But it wouldn't be wrong to say that more, you can say, revolutionary or radical changes, they have only been happening since the last 5 years, since the ascension of King Salman to the Saudi throne and the rise of Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. And we have seen the political authority being very effectively emphasized and implemented within the religious fold, and gradually we have seen different parts that were associated or different domains that were specifically the domains of the religious clerics. They have been very much reduced. So we have seen the end of the part of the Saudi religious police, and so they are no longer being able to enforce morality, and of course their sense of morality or their sense of, I can say, religious principalization was very much in their own theological understanding. So that was a major change within the Saudi religious fold, which basically shows that how the power trajectory is shifting from within the Saudi religious fold. And then we know that there were other processes of social liberalization, of course, which we all know. The women were given the right to drive, and also new avenues of entertainment have been opening up, and generally the society is following a trend towards opening up. But there is here it is very important to not only focus on the voices and the slogans, or you can say the discourses, but also on the silences, which are very apparent within the Saudi religious fold, that after every such development that relates, that basically ends one of the prerogatives of Saudi religious establishment or its subsidiaries, usually there is no reaction at all from the officials within the ulama council or within the official cadres. The only reaction which comes up is a reaction of approval and backing of the state. Another interesting you can say it's an event or happening that I have seen over the years is a tendency to not fix one particular imam for the khutbatul hajj. So every year there is a new imam who delivers the khutbah of hajj, and the traditional seniority or sanctity that came with the you can say the position of leading the Hajj or giving the sermon of Hajj within the, I would say, broader Islamic world has very much been compromised. And every year there is a new person who delivers the sermon. Although, I mean, the sermon was always, of course, authorized by the Saudi authorities and the Saudi government, but still there was an added on value into it. So these are the general tendencies within the Saudi religious fold, and if we see the traditional voices are following a general trajectory of silence, and as we see some of them a few days ago, a couple of weeks ago, Sheikh Nasser al-Shatri, Sheikh Nasser al-Shatri, he died. So they're the prominent names. They are also, you can say, in such a stage of their lives that they cannot be very active, or they are just secluded mostly at their homes or in their madaris or within their mosques. So there is not much religious activism as well, for certain other reasons, not only because of government censure. So who are the new emerging you can say faces or leaderships within the Saudi religious fold? One very important face, or one very important leadership. Yes.
Sorry, brother.
How many?
You're past 20 minutes. So if
okay,
you could,
I'll just finish it now.
Yeah, if you can.
Okay, so we know that Sheikh Abdul Karim Al-Isa, the head of the World Muslim League, he is a known figure who has risen up and has been very prominent within the Saudi religious fold, and the discourse coming from his side is of moderation and of you can say reconciliation and engagement with religions, and he has prayed at Auschwitz, and he has also engaged with other religious leaderships across the world. So it is very different discourse in this regard. And then we see Sheikh Abdul Latif Al-Sheikh, the Minister of Religious Affairs. He is a very important person in this regard, who used to work under King Salman when he was the Emir of Riyadh province. So he is also has a history with the current ruling family, and there is visible reduction openly in the takfir that happened towards Saudi Shia citizens, particularly in the mosques, Sunni mosques in eastern province, and also within the general public sphere. There has been, specifically in the Saudi youth, there have been changes. For instance, when COVID struck eastern province, there was a trend on because COVID came first into the eastern province in Saudi Arabia, there was a trend on Saudi Twitter that we are all eastern province. I mean, this, of course, this is not a representative of the whole Saudi Arabia, but still these voices and their projection does matter. So I will end up and conclude this whole discussion by saying that the political the political backing and political censure of Saudi religious fold has been happening for some time, but under King Salman and Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, this has, of course, it has been very rapid, and new Saudi religious leaderships have been emerging that are projecting discourses of moderation and reconciliation at the cost of discourses of othering and discourses of discrimination against particularly Saudi citizens. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Omar. Thank you for such a forensic analysis on the role of sectarianism, the discourse of sectarianism in Saudi Arabia. And as someone in Saudi, being Saudi, I could attest to these incredible social changes and transformations that are happening right now. It's not even the same as nowhere near the same as I used to be 5 years ago, let alone 10, 15 years ago. So you're certainly spot on there. And now, the last but not least, every time I do this, my schedule goes away. So I am very sorry for this mishap. 1 second, please, everybody. There we go. There we go, Aziz. Okay. Right. Last but not least, our friend Rashid Al-Rashid from Lancaster University is going to present his work on legacy and sectarianization, a content analysis of Hassan Nasrallah's speech in YouTube about Syria, about Syrian crisis. And we're very looking forward to this. Thank you very much, Rashid, and take it away whenever you're ready, my friend.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Aziz. First, I will share my PowerPoint.
Yep, looking good.
Clear to you?
Yep, we can see it. Yep, start whenever you're ready. Uh-oh.
Just a minute.
Yeah, we'll do it again.
Okay, we can see it now.
Yeah, we can see it, yeah.
My paper is about the legacy securitizations and the content analysis and Hassan Nasrallah's speeches on Rhetoric of the Syrian crisis. This paper is talking about the role of social active survival and audience peers in the MENA, which is explored from the perspective of historical perceptions. It's widely known that in the MENA, both of historical events and legacy shape the social and political context, which is impact as well on the positions of conduct or behaviors or even the perceptions of people toward the security issues and the challenges. Whether it is still unknown that how historical events and wars play significant role in shaping the perceptions and the fears of audiences in the MENA. Harry Pearson and Paul Weaver, Yves Vivaldi, in their paper was a new framework of analysis. They talk about security is about survival. And based on this understanding, any subject, for instance, a social identity, may be framed as an existential threat to actor behind the state. So the social order of the subject and the threat are accordingly could be classified as a threat for some actor in the Middle East. Within Copenhagen schools has been particularly efficient and exploring how wide-ranging matters such as the identity of society and democracy is seen as a crucial threat to the states. Thierry Bazelot, in his paper, The Essence of Securitizations, he speaks about how community must be maintained, its identity, with converting the identity that community through the social variations between actors, which could pose a challenge to existence at the different levels and layers in society and state as well. So changing the values of community could be classified as a threat. for political power. As well, the rising of the struggle between the social group and authorities and MENA within the context of identity, for example, Sunni, Shia, and other players, it gives us an indicators to what extent identity is really important within the securitization process. So, security issues are constructed through diverse perceptions and by various actors within the spaces of narrative environment. And this is the main key words in my paper, is narrative environment, where the political and social area exists to assert the significance of various contexts and security matters. And there is another scholar, his name is Matt McDonald. He wrote his paper, Securitization and Constructions of Security. I used his thought about the narrative environment and the role of narrative environment in securitization's process, and the role of narrative environment in facilitating conditions and the frame of object of a threat, regardless the object of threats. So McDonald, in his paper, he argued that the argument that within the Copenhagen schools over how the speech act is framed, it's may take any one of different major types. So within this context, there is a concern that given in contextual features and their factions in facilitating conditions and the role of narrative environment, which the narrative environments here, it's give the player an opportunities or an effective tools to push the audience against the target. So the securitization process in this context is a react with several contexts and identifying the factions of the audience against the threat and the object of threats. There is an importance of a speech of acts and within the realizations that the narrative environment could be urge the people to move against the object of threats, especially with the contractions of identity in societies. Based on the McDonald framework, I use the concept of narrative environments and I link it with the concept of legacy and historical events. Just I would like to remind you, still the historical perceptions, historical events, regardless on the events between the social group, whether wars, conflict, tensions, sectarians, whatever, it's still impact on people perceptions, on the people behaviors, or understanding about our current phenomena. So the historical context of legacy, it's a play significant role within the securitization process in the MENA for mobilizing the audience, where the narrative environment and narrative framework is critical to analyze the political phenomena in the MENA, because the narrative environment shape the political imaginations and the behaviors about the current political context. as well, it enhances the fears of audience when you bring the past to their current situation. So based on the Matt McDonald's context for the narrative environment and the role of legacy, where he mentioned that the narrative environment is the process with the start with designations of a threat and move to generate facility conditions. So I use this concept and I link it with the legacy. So how I analyze this perceptions, the role of fears and legacy and facilitate conditions and the moving audience. Actually, I analyze the Hassan Nasrallah speeches toward the Syria crisis and how he framed many objects of threats. I will classify to you later, and how he used the legacies, the historical events, okay, to facilitate conditions and to justify the role of Hezbollah in Syria and to move the audience against the object of threats in Syria. So the main aim of this paper is to answer on the following questions: to what extent legacy context and Hassan Nasrallah's speeches in YouTube regarding the Syria crisis lead to mobilize the Shia, the public audience, against the threat of ISIS or other objects of threats. In order to answer my questions, I use content analysis approach. Content analysis approach, which is quite different from the discourse analysis, which this paper is analyze the interconnections between audience fees and historical legacies and way which the narrative environment facilitate the process of securitization, which this involve, let's say, or analyze the Hassan Nasrallah videos or speeches in YouTube and analyze how he framed the threat and how he actually reinforced the fears by evoking historical events in his speeches in YouTube, by analyze the frequencies, the quantity of the words and the context in his speeches regarding the threat or regarding the type of fears. So I highlight on the type of legacies by looking on the quantity of the words regarding the threats or fears and the amount of words in his speeches, and how this lead to facilitate the process of securitization. As well, I analyzed the reactions of audience on YouTube and their comments by analyze the kind of fears of audience and their comments, as well the kind of threats according to their comments section. However, I didn't end my analysis yet. I analyzed the Hassan Nasrallah speeches, but I didn't finish yet from analyzing the comments of audiences and their comments in the YouTube. Actually, I applied the content analysis methods to analyze over 60 random videos for Hassan Nasrallah speeches from 2013 to 2020. These speeches include around 39,000 words, and more than 3 million people have watched these videos in different channels, around 16 YouTube channels such as Al Jadida News or MTV Lebanon News, but the most of channels, they belong to Hezbollah or Syrian regime or Lebanese channels or other Shia channels. I don't know their background exactly. And these channels, the 16 channels, got over 37 million subscribers. As we can see here, the number of likes for videos and dislikes, and the comments and videos, supportive comments and videos, the opposing comments and videos against Hassan Nasrallah, or supportive comments, the people who support Hassan. Neutral comments, and the comment not accounted. Here, I mean by comment not accounted, there was a discussions in the comments, audience's comments, which is not related to the context of videos or not related to Syria, or there is a sectarian or hateness speeches between the audience. Therefore, I didn't account that. The frequencies of Syria and the speeches is around 1,900 words and 16 videos. Number of word speeches, as I mentioned here, the maximum 59,000. The number of subscribers, the video length, the number of viewers. So let's move now to the results. As you can see here from this table, I found that both of Qatar and Al-Qaeda and Syrian positions and the Syrian army and the Kurds as well, okay, and Muslim Brotherhood, as you can see here, just 0.1%. They have the lowest portions of securitization process at only 40% of frequencies as exist, which is here. The Hassan Nasrallah frame those players, Al-Qaeda, pre-army Syria, and the Kurds, Muslim Brotherhood. He framed them as an existential threat to the Al-Muqawama in Syria, just 4%. However, the ISIS got the highest proportions of frequencies as an existential threat to the Muqawama in Syria, and the ratio was, as you can see here, 22%. Then Israel and the United States have been seen as existential threats, was around 70% for Israel, and the United States was 60%. Regarding to Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia is framed as a threat with 9% from Hassan Nasrallah's speeches. Regarding to the Takfiri group, Turkey as a state, I mean, yeah, the terroristic group, the armed group, I don't know. Actually, the Hassan Nasrallah, he didn't classify what the meaning of armed groups. This is, I mean, when I analyze all of his speeches, he didn't mention the definitions of armed groups. All of them, they got the percentage between 5 to 6%. So now let's move to the quantity of legacy in Hassan Nasrallah's speeches. What kind of legacy he used to move the people? What kind of historical events he actually tried to remind the audience to convince them about the Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah movement in Syria. He brings different kind of legacies here we can see a few kind of legacies such as Arab and Islamic unity. He speaks about the Islamic and Arab unity and the segregations. He speaks about the 12 imams, that which is the main kind of legacy for the Shia, and he speaks about his their sacrifice against the oppressed, against the enemy, against the other. And he speaks about the Mazlumiyya, the injustice against the Shia, and he speaks about the occupations of Arab countries from United States and the role of Gulf countries in support in support United States and invasions of Arab countries like Iraq or Afghanistan. Okay, so the Hassan Nasrallah, he tried to convince the people that there is an oppression in Arab countries, and the Arab countries have been invaded by the United States with the support of Arab countries, like some of Gulf countries. He brings this kind of stuff and historical stuff to convince the people. Then, as you can see as well from this table, that Al-Muqawma legacy, we speak about the Al-Muqawma legacy during the last 40 years and their sacrifice against Israel during the civil wars in Lebanon and against United States in the region. Okay, and he tried to convince or try to frame the Al-Muqawma as a hero, and which is this take I think here 21.8%, and which is more than other legacies such as martyrs. He speak about shuhada, the martyrs of the Shia, such as Sadr, Musa Sadr, the famous leaders in Lebanon. As well, he speak about Ahmad Mughniya and his sacrifices. Okay, this is one of kind of legacy he tried to bring it in his speeches, and he speak as well Al-Qaeda and ISIS, which was around 20%, 0.6. Usually, Hassan Nasrallah in his speeches, when he framed Al-Qaeda and ISIS, Daesh, and his role and their role in Iraq or Syria, okay, and the near borders to the Lebanon, he always tried to convince the audience that Al-Qaeda and Daesh is created by Israel, Saudi Arabia, and United States. See how he bring all of these stuff together in one place. It was horrible. However, which is I didn't analyze finish from analyzing the audience comments and YouTube, but I found hundreds of people, they still believe about this perception that come from Hassan Nasrallah.
Rashid, my dear friend, just if you could just conclude because it's over, still 22 minutes now. So if you could conclude.
Okay, I will try to conclude in 1 minute.
Just like
see here the Palestinian legacy, which is one thing that he bring it around 28%, just to convince people about his role in Syria. And in my paper, I tried to analyze the role of legacy and narrative environment and how it is used by the Hassan Nasrallah in order to justify the Hezbollah interventions in Syria. He tried to bring out the legacy of the historical events just to facilitate the conditions and the securitizations of forces against the objects of threat. And this is the end. Many thanks indeed. This is yours.
Wonderful, Rashid. Thank you very much for such an incredible insight into Hassan Nasrallah's speech. And you know, as I said before, you're certainly not making me feel guilty now that I've been watching YouTube for all this time. So I've been doing a lot of work too. So thank you very much. Okay, everybody, we're slightly past behind schedule, so I won't ask the questions to any of the panelists. I'll instead ask questions from the audience, and then I'll send the questions to the panelists myself, the ones that I have. So stand by. So I think the first one is from Iyad to Balsam. So really marvelous and much needed. Can those slogans and anashid tell us something about the development of the Iraqi national identity after 2003? Is there an emerging Iraqi identity that can redefine the role of politics in Sunni Islam, or the emergence of national identity is bounded to exclude sectarian identification? I think so. If you could succinctly, concisely answer that,
yeah,
would be.
I will try. Two important questions. So thanks very much, Iyad. Thanks, everyone. I think there are two levels here. So the individual or the societal level, and there the political level. And of course, post-2003, the secondary identities, those sectarian or ethnic identities, were heightened in the political discourse and were used as tools, whether by Sunni politicians or Shia politicians, to control and to impose power. And this led to tension between the communities and violence. Now, there have been initiatives even before the protests took place, really, by civil society members to start to push away those secondary identities and to reclaim an Iraqi identity. And yes, I think when it comes to the political discourse, I think, or to the rhetoric, I think now there is less focus on sectarian identification. Because politicians now know and understand that people are not going to buy the same old narratives, victimhood narratives, or narratives about, legitimacy of rule or power. But I think there are always this, the sectarianism and sectarian identities can always be used as tools to trigger tension. So they are not going to go away. And it's really important to keep in mind that it's not just about rhetoric or discourse. It's about functional institutions and a strong rule of law. It's about social justice. And we are not just talking about Shia or Sunnis. Iraq has diverse communities of Christians, Yazidis, and Turkmen and Kurds, of course. So there are different communities, and all of them feel that they are marginalized, that they do not get their rights. So unless they feel that they are true citizens, getting their basic rights, then there are always questions about whether this Iraqi identity would prevail or not. I hope this answer your questions even partially.
Was really good. That was thank you very much for answering that. The next question is for Batul from Tom. So Iranian involvement in Yemen has been both overstated and understated in the history of the Yemeni conflict. One thing that is for sure is that it has cost them a tiny fraction of what it has cost Saudi Arabia. Do you think the increase in Iranian support over time was done on purpose by Tehran to divert Saudi attention away from Syria? So, and then let me take the other questions too. Or actually, yeah, if you could go take that one, please, Batul.
Yeah, actually, also there's Iyad's question, so I can just combine them because they have similar positions. Yeah. So for Tom's, thank you for all the good comments and motivation. yes, many people, many scholars or like experts working on the region see the overstatement of Iran's role in Yemen, but I don't know if it is like trolling Saudi Arabia or something else. But in Syria, it's not my expertise, but to my knowledge, there's also this Russian impact on Saudi Arabian foreign policy making in Syria, which is kind of affecting its approachment to Iran. And also now we are talking about an Iranian-Saudi, current negotiation between them. So I think we will see different, that's why we will see a different position maybe, or a revised position in Yemen as well. But when it comes to Iyad's question, which is asking about the current leadership and the change in Saudi policy making and the national vision, how it is going to be affected on the sectarian discourse in general. I was reading the current book by Azmi Bishara on sectarianism. And as he said in the book, to be sectarian or to have a sectarian discourse, you don't need to be religious. So that's what we see in Saudi Arabian foreign policy or any other foreign policy making. If the leader is enthusiastic to use the narrative of sectarianism, whether the leader himself or herself is religious or not religious, there is always a way to accommodate it. But I am optimistic in terms of Saudi Arabian foreign policy making, because when we check the embassy's current reform and the dynamic foreign policy making, I think he would like to revise all these things. That's why they approach with Iran. They would like to also change the position in Yemen, because they are basically losing, not only militarily, but also economically and politically. So that's why I think there will be changes, as you said, positively. And I hope sectarianism won't be anymore a tool, because it's really devastating the social structure in the Gulf. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Batul, and thank you for combining those both very well. Another question from our very hyperactive Iyad. That's wonderful. Iyad is always making great contributions. To Omar this time. So Iyad asks, can recent developments of Saudi national identity in change and the othering process in relations to sectarian legacy since 1979, because this is also something I want to kind of throw in also my kind of take on this, is what role does Saudi nationalism now, the increase of Saudi nationalism now affect or play or situate itself in the discourse of sectarianism? So Omar, whenever you're ready, my friend, take it away.
All right. So I think here, one is particularly the sort of, you can say, changes in the Saudi foreign policy. And it's my understanding that Saudi Arabia now views Iran as a threat from a structural realist perspective. So it's not even the nature of Iran after the Islamic Revolution. And there isn't the sense within, at least I think, within Saudi decision-making quarters, that there is a sense within Saudi decision-making quarters that we should use our Shia citizens as a resource rather than as a burden. So we can try our Shia citizenry to make bridges, to build bridges with Iraq specifically. And so why we always view them as a fifth column, while we can actually use them to build bridges. So I think there is, at least at the political level, the othering. I see it going out. But the question of national identity, I mean, there is another trend that usually, if the wind has been blowing in one direction for, let's say, 40 years, then it does change its direction. After all, we have seen how things changed in Egypt after Nasser and all his pan-Arab rhetoric. It gone like this. So, and I also like specifically some demographic changes within the Saudi society. I think the King Abdullah Scholarship, it also has created at least, I mean, new debate points within people. So for me, in my understanding, I think things from this point onwards, there will be change. What kind of change, we cannot say, because if tomorrow there is again a critical development, things can go opposite as well, because people are complex beings. Their identities, they do go through different periods and different changes. But for now, it seems that the wind is blowing towards a nationalist Saudi identity. It seems so.
Yes, thank you very much, Omar, and I agree with you on that. I find this a very interesting fusion taking place between the Saudi national identity, or at least Saudi nationalism, and the discourse of Saudi nationalism, where there is an element of sectarianism in there, and there is this, alongside other things and other processes of liberalization, but they're, and it's certainly very interesting and worth digging into. So thank you very much for shedding more light on that. So and then we'll take Ilyas's question, the man behind the scenes. This question is for Rashid. So Ilyas asks, I love how you use numbers. Can you explain, Rashid, can you please tell me more about the quantitative method? For example, how do you define supportive or neutral variables before measuring them? So it's very interesting question, because I think the work really says a lot.
Yeah. First of all, I would like to apologize. I didn't explain my methodology in deep because it needed a lot of time. However, in terms of, if we take, for example, the concept of supportive or neutral, when I come with analyze the comments in YouTube, okay, I classified the all comments in different sections, okay, based on the discussions and the rhythm of discussions of the audience. For example, let's take the supportive. I mean here the supportive, it's supportive to Hassan Nasrallah, or supportive to Hezbollah, supportive to the Al-Muqawama, or supportive to Iran and their rule, because I put them all of them in the one block. The opposite, they are represent different spectrum. It could be they are pro-American or pro-Gulf or pro-Saudi or pre-other player, but they are against al-Muqawama block. Regarding to neutral, I found that this is the minority and the number of comments. They are the minority. They are actually, when they analyze the people who give their comment, when they analyze situations in Syria and as well in the region, they usually do not stop with any block, or whether the Gulf or Iran or Hezbollah or United States. They try to analyze, and without any tensions or support to any parties or actors in the region. For example, they usually support the most of them, the neutral, they support the idea that what happened in Syria, it is a sectarian conflict. It doesn't serve the Arab and Islamic societies in the region. So they are against the both sides and against the all players, okay? And they usually stand with the platform of de-sectarizations. And this is something that's really important here. I need to define this in my paper. Many thanks, Ilyas.
Fantastic, thank you. You know what I found really interesting about yours, Rashid, was the fact that when I think in your findings, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the United States were so close to each other.
Yeah.
And for me, this is what I found so fascinating, because throughout the years of research on this, I've really found how they've been kind of different focal points, that Saudi Arabia meant Israel and Israel meant Saudi Arabia, or at least they were mentioned simultaneously in the same sentence. So I found that grouping to create even a better understanding between Saudi Arabia and Israel. And that's, so your work is very complementary, and it speaks to other themes. So thank you, thank you very much for sharing that. Okay, everybody. Thank you all very much for the panels, for all the participants. Thank you very much, Balsam. Thank you very much, Batul. Thank you very much, Omar, and thank you very much, Rashid, for presenting on an excellent panel. As you can see, it's the end of the day. It's the end of the day, beginning of the night here. So my tongue is heavy. My tongue is heavy. But I think now we're entering into the conclusion of the wonderful workshop that we had today. I wanted to share my thanks to Lord Almighty for blessing us here, for giving us at least, you know, the opportunity to do this, and that you're all safe. I wanted to thank, you know, all the presenters for sharing your enthusiasm with us regarding the role of language in discourse analysis. And I know this will help further even, you know, the scope of not just sectarianism, but discourse analysis. It's, you know, we've heard incredible insights from, you know, from speaking to sectarianism in Europe, and Christian minorities and struggles, and you know, it shed light on a lot of cases that really enlightened everybody. And I was expecting, I mean, I knew I was going to be enlightened, but I didn't know I was going to get enlightened this much and this far by all your presentations. So I just wanted to thank, you know, all the presenters for sharing their enthusiasm. I know we'll all be in touch. I also wanted to thank very much the people that helped organize this. My friend Mustafa, who you know, me and him, we've been working together on this a lot, and you know, so he'll say a couple of words. I also wanted to thank personally Simon and Ed for helping inspire, you know, this, and for giving us the blessing, and giving us hopefully the, you know, the green light and the platform, you know, because some researchers are looking for a home. They, you know, I found a home here in Sepad, and I don't want to leave it. And my colleagues at Sepad, who the discussions with them really helped inspire this workshop. It was really emanating from the discussions that we had. So long may it continue. You know, I don't want to touch upon, you know, the themes that we looked at and what we could take away, because there's just so many interesting themes, and I'm just so glad that it was recorded so we could go back to it and listen to it again. So thank you all very much from the bottom of my heart. I really appreciate it. And Mustafa, if you have any other words, please say. And I wanted to say one more thing. Thank you to the glue, Elias, who made this stick together. He was the platform that made us all, and orchestrating the, you know, the technological aspects, and helping us with the aesthetics of the presentations, and facilitating the technology. So, you know, he's equally responsible for the success of today. So I really appreciate it. Thank you very much, everybody. Mustafa, all yours, my friend.
Thanks, Aziz. It was my pleasure working with you, and yeah, I enjoyed it today. Yeah, I would say it's a great. I can see the discursive turn in sectarianism coming up. That's great. To update, we are working on a special issue. Why a bit late in that? Because we want a special issue with an esteemed journal that is high ranking, that adds up to our research portfolio, and after today, we're going to start actually putting a proposal, a solid one, in order to approach just a peer-reviewed journal as well. So please be ready for the call for papers. Probably we cannot accommodate everyone, but it's really great that we put that in mind. And secondly, please, I love to use the conferences as a networking opportunity. By the time that I'm talking to you now, I'm chatting with Marta. She keeps sending me articles. She's trying to proselytize me into her identity-focused approach. So probably I'm already converted by now. So please get in touch with us, each one. Let's bring our community together on this, because we all share that passion. with each other on that. Thirdly, CPAD has many events as well. Have a look at the website. Conference coming in December, and one about oil, another about sect and the city. Just don't misspell the title. That's great. So probably it's many great events. It's a really a great place to be part of CPAD. Follow it on Twitter. So I don't know, I sound like self-promotional, but it's I enjoy it here. Actually, I feel this sense of a sectarian in group solidarity, if I put as such. Yeah, there's a bit of sectarian about just the sectarianism project that we're part of. Well, this is great. So please just, it's great to have you. I learned a lot as well. Just forgive us if any problematic issues comes up. So finally, thanks to Ilyas, the man who is actually letting us doing that. Otherwise we are freaking out. And finally, thanks to Simon Mabon and Edward Westnich, who are actually just at the top of what we do, giving us the, as he said, the privilege. Great talks as well. Thank you so much for that.